Rural girl forced sign prenuptial agreement. When they saw that she inherited $35 million, Before we dive into this breathtaking story, leave a comment below telling us which city and country you're watching us from. Stay tuned until the end. The farm and the proposal. Clara Whitmore lived on a small farm in rural Kansas, where she had been tending corn and raising chickens since she was a child. Despite financial difficulties, she learned from her mother, who had died 5 years earlier, to value work and maintain dignity even in the worst storms. Her father, already weakened by age and alcohol, rarely left his room, which made Clara the living soul of the house. Her routine was simple but filled with dreams that she kept well hidden, until the day Logan Hawthorne reappeared in her life. Logan was different from everyone else around Clara. The son of Texas bankers and accustomed to private jets and corporate meetings, he met Clara during a university agricultural extension project, when she was asked to present a sustainable solution in the field. He was charmed by her intelligence and authenticity, and even after the program ended, they kept in touch. A year later, he showed up at the farm with a diamond ring and a proposal that caught Clara off guard. He wanted to marry her in less than 2 months. Despite her surprise, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She wasn't a naive woman, but she believed that true love could exist even between different worlds. She accepted his proposal, not without hesitation, and tried to imagine a life far from the countryside, among skyscrapers and social events. Even without knowing exactly where she was standing, she wanted to believe that Logan saw her as an equal, as a partner, not as a charity project. But something in his gaze that afternoon still seemed distant, as if there was something he wasn't telling her. In the following days, Logan was firm in his plans. He talked about the ceremony in Houston, about the guests, and about the importance of the family's image for the business. Clara, still wrapped up in the emotion of the proposal, agreed to participate in the planning, even though she didn't understand half of the names and traditions mentioned. But one detail began to bother her: the absence of any mention of his mother, Miranda Hawthorne, one of the most influential women in Texas. And the closer the date of the trip to meet her got, the more Clara realized that her entry into that world wouldn't be easy. The first rejection. The Hawthorne mansion felt more like a museum than a home. Clara had never seen marble staircases or servants lined up like chess pieces. As soon as she entered, her simple dress felt out of place with everything around her. Logan tried to reassure her, but his eyes avoided direct contact. When Miranda appeared at the top of the stairs, her white hair neatly pinned back and her gaze steely, Clara knew she would not be welcome here. Miranda made no attempt to hide her disdain. When she greeted Clara, she didn't even touch her, limiting herself to a brief glance and a cutting comment about her accent. Dinner that night was filled with awkward silences and coded conversations, where every word hid a judgment. Clara tried to smile and remain firm, but she realized that she was surrounded by people who saw her as a threat, or worse, as a joke. The next day, Miranda was blunt. She called Clara into her office for a private conversation and, bluntly, spoke about the Hawthorne family legacy. She said that as much as Logan was in love, he would not allow a country girl to jeopardize years of reputation, influence, and wealth. The condition for marriage was clear: the signing of a prenuptial agreement in which Clara waived any right to inheritance, property, or interest in companies. Clara remained silent. Her pride was hurt, but she didn't let it show. She knew that if she showed weakness at this moment, Miranda would crush her. She went back to the room where Logan was waiting and confronted him. He, visibly uncomfortable, tried to downplay the situation, saying it was just a formality, a demand from his mother. Clara felt her stomach churn. For the first time, she knew that Logan wouldn't protect her, and that here, she would be on her own. The contract. The next day, a lawyer arrived with a leather briefcase and a neutral expression. Jeffrey Cross, representing the Hawthorne family, explained the document bluntly. The agreement provided that Clara would have no rights to any assets acquired before or during the marriage, even if there were children. Furthermore, any future separation was to be resolved without legal challenge. It was a contract designed to protect not a union but an empire. Clara sat at the mahogany desk, staring at the paper in front of her as if she were facing a sentence. There was no fair clause, no room for negotiation. She looked at Logan, expecting a gesture of compassion or support, but he just looked away. crossing his arms as if he were also a hostage to the situation. His silence was more painful than the contract itself. Despite the pain, Clara signed. She knew that this would define how she would be treated by everyone from then on. But she also knew that her dignity did not lie in that paper, but in the way she would move forward. Jeffrey collected the documents without showing any emotion, as if he had just concluded a common transaction. Miranda, from a distance, watched with a discreet smile, convinced that she had won. In the following days, Clara threw herself into the wedding preparations without showing any signs of weakness. She attended dress fittings, meetings with wedding planners, and photo shoots as if everything was in perfect order. Inside, however, she felt suffocated. This was not the life he had dreamed of. It was a prison disguised as a fairy tale. And the cruelest thing of all, she herself had turned the key to the cell. The loneliness of the bride. Despite being surrounded by luxury and expensive flowers, Clara had never felt so alone. Her calls to her father were brief, and he barely understood what was happening. In the mansion, no one spoke to her beyond what was necessary. The servants kept their distance, and the family members smiled smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Clara missed the smell of wet earth and the sound of roosters at dawn. The only person she could count on was Ruby Jensen, her childhood friend. Ruby worked as a waitress in Austin and was the only one Clara confided everything to. The two met discreetly at a cafe in the city, where Clara told her about the contract, Miranda and Logan's coldness. Ruby, angry, tried to convince her to call it off, but Clara only replied that she was already halfway down the road, and it was too late to turn back now. Ruby offered her unconditional support. She said that if Clara wanted, she would quit her job and help her with any plan, in any city. That friendship was the only respite from the suffocation that Clara felt. Even without concrete plans, she knew that, at some point, she would need to make a decision that would change everything. And she would have Ruby by her side when that moment came. Back at the mansion, Clara began to observe more and speak less. She noticed the secret meetings between Logan and his mother, the late-night phone calls with Jeffrey, the hushed whispers when she passed by. Little by little, she was putting together a silent puzzle, and although she didn't have the complete pieces yet, it was already clear that in this game, she was seen as nothing more than a disposable piece. The eve of the wedding. The night before the wedding, Clara was in the guest room overlooking the mansion's gardens. The calm of the environment contrasted with the internal chaos she felt. She tried to concentrate on the final details of the dress and the rehearsals for the ceremony, but her mind was elsewhere. That was when the housekeeper brought her a special letter from California, sent by a law firm. The letter was addressed to Miss Clara Rothschild Whitmore, a surname she had not used in years. It was from her mother's side of the family, from which her mother had estranged herself after a falling out with her grandfather, Eugene Rothschild, a billionaire Silicon Valley investor. Clara kept the letter unopened, fearing it was yet another pain from the past resurfacing at the wrong time. She promised herself she would read it after the ceremony. Later, when she went downstairs for dinner, she found Logan with a group of friends from the financial sector. He introduced her coldly, without pride or enthusiasm. During the toast, he talked about investments, mergers, and oil deals, completely ignoring the bride next to him. Clara smiled, pretending not to care, but inside she felt that something had broken irreversibly. When she returned to her room, Clara sat on the edge of her bed and finally opened the letter. She read the first few lines and was transfixed. This wasn't just a message, it was a summons. And although she didn't yet know the true impact of those words, her heart told her that everything was about to change. Maybe, for the first time, she wouldn't be the one on her knees. The cold wedding. The wedding day dawned sunny, but Clara felt a weight on her chest that not even the stunning dress could alleviate. The cameras were positioned, the guests lined up, and everything looked like a movie production. But inside, she was empty. Each step to the altar sounded like a funeral march for everything she had once believed to be love. Miranda was radiant, as if the wedding were hers. She welcomed the guests like a royal hostess and made a point of repeating that the ceremony was a symbolic union between opposing worlds. Clara swallowed her anger, but every word registered. Logan, in his tailored suit, barely looked her in the eye. The kiss sealing their vows was brief and measured, more a formality than a gesture of true affection. At the reception, toasts and speeches touted the Hawthorne tradition and Clara's luck in being part of the family. No one mentioned her name without linking it to Logan or the company's new corporate social responsibility brand. Clara was a fixture, a piece in a carefully curated display case. Even the congratulations seemed insincere, fraught with hypocrisy. When she was finally alone, late at night, Clara took off her dress and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The young woman from the farm was still there, but her eyes were different. Now, in addition to the pain, there was a different spark: determination. She picked up the letter again and read it more carefully. Tomorrow, she would have a meeting in San Francisco, and perhaps that would be the beginning of the real story. Eugene's testament. On the Monday after the wedding, Clara traveled alone to San Francisco as indicated in the correspondence. At the Rothschild and Pines office, she was met by a lawyer named Gregory Tannen, a man with a firm voice and a matter-of-fact manner. He explained that her maternal grandfather, Eugene Rothschild, had died 4 months earlier, and since he had no direct heirs, he left his granddaughter Clara, with whom he had not spoken for years, as the sole beneficiary. The amount inherited was over $35 million in addition to shares in funds and properties in California. Clara was shocked. She knew that her grandfather was a big name in the technology market, but she never imagined that he would keep her in his plans after his separation from her mother. The lawyer explained that Eugene had been following her life from a distance and that, even without direct contact, he recognized in her the honesty and strength of the daughter he had lost early. The will had only one clause. Clara had to appear in person to sign the documents within 15 days of the wedding, because he knew that this would change everything. Still digesting the information, Clara left the office without telling anyone. At that moment, she decided that she would keep it a secret until she understood exactly how and when she would use this powerful card. She knew that if the news got out, the Hawthorns would change their stance completely, and she was not about to let that happen without first exposing all the hypocrisies she had swallowed in silence. For the first time, she felt like she had control of the narrative. Back at the hotel, Clara reflected on the recent months and realized how much she had sacrificed herself to please, all in the name of a love that, in the end, proved to be cowardly and convenient. Now, with the inheritance in her hands, she didn't want immediate revenge, but something deeper: respect. And to achieve that, she would need to be strategic, silent, and firm. The game had changed, and no one yet knew that the most underestimated piece had become the most powerful: the Hawthorne mask. Upon returning to Houston, Clara noticed subtle changes in Logan's behavior. He seemed more anxious, checking his cell phone frequently as if waiting for news. Miranda, on the other hand, was more occupied with a conference at the family bank and barely spoke to her daughter-in-law. Clara took advantage of the moment of general distraction to deepen her own investigations. She knew that something at the Hawthorne Company was about to collapse, and this could serve her plans. During a meeting where Logan was trying to convince investors to inject capital into the new family holding company, Clara remained silent, just observing. But she noticed inconsistent numbers, unrealistic projections, and an attempt to hide losses. After the presentation, in an informal conversation, she discreetly questioned one of the more experienced investors, who confirmed her suspicions. The Hawthorne empire was on the verge of bankruptcy and was hiding it to save face. The discovery gave Clara a new light. Their marriage had never been about love, but about image, control, and, above all, money. Logan needed a wife with a docile appearance and an unblemished reputation to maintain the trust of the market. Clara, the simple country girl, fit the bill perfectly, until that day. Now that she was the heiress to an even greater fortune, her role had changed, and she knew exactly how to use it to her advantage. Still, Clara gave nothing away. She maintained an appearance of submission and let Logan believe she was still in control of the situation. But inside, she was calculating every move. She had entered this game alone, forced to sign a humiliating contract, and now with the dice turned, she intended to return every pain she had suffered, not with screams, but with facts, power, and intelligence. The inversion of power. Clara scheduled a video meeting with Gregory Tannen, requesting that the transfer of the inheritance be kept strictly confidential for a few more weeks. She also asked that her new financial identity be registered in a separate trust, away from the Hawthorne name. The lawyer, though surprised, agreed to the strategy. Clara was thinking like a true Rothschild, coolly, precisely, and patiently. That same week, she discreetly received confirmation that a shielded account had been opened in her name, with full access to the shares and properties she had inherited. She was also introduced to the team that would manage her new assets. With all the keys in hand, Clara began reviewing contracts, contacting consultants, and restructuring her life without depending on anyone. Her past on the farm was part of her essence, but now she knew how to navigate the world of the big boys. Meanwhile, Miranda was organizing a charity dinner to raise funds and attract investors. Clara was included in the list of hosts, but this time she arrived with a haughty demeanor, wearing a dress by her own designer, without asking for approval. When she took the stage and gave a speech about philanthropy, she charmed the audience with her confidence. By the end of the evening, the looks on her were no longer of contempt, but of curiosity and admiration. Logan noticed the change. He tried to get closer, complimenting her attitude, offering expensive gifts and suggesting a trip to the Caribbean. But Clara could see it clearly. He didn't want the woman she was. He wanted the image she projected. And now she didn't have to try to please him anymore. For the first time, she felt like she had value in her own right, and that changed the whole dynamic of the game. Unmasking Logan. While investigating the family's business dealings, Clara discovered that Logan was using her name as a silent guarantor in negotiations with international banks. Although she was still legally ineligible for the Hawthorne estate, Clara had become a valuable asset in the family's narrative of restoring their image. This revolted her. This was the height of manipulation, using her appearance to cover up a series of frauds and risky financial gambles. Without telling anyone, Clara hired an independent auditor to review Hawthorne Capital's finances. The results confirmed everything. There was accounting fraud, embezzlement of funds, and money laundering through fake donations. Clara could not act publicly without getting directly involved, but she realized that she could anonymously hand over the information to the press. And so she did, with a complete dossier sent to a trusted investigative journalist. Days later, the media began to question the company's financial health. Rumors of internal instability leaked, and shares plummeted. Miranda went into crisis mode, calling emergency meetings, while Logan freaked out trying to find out who had leaked the information. Clara watched everything calmly, knowing that this was just the beginning of the downfall that they themselves had caused. That night, Clara finally slept peacefully. She didn't want shallow revenge, but methodical justice. Every humiliation she had suffered was being reversed with strategy, and there was still more to come. Logan would begin to realize that the woman he thought he was manipulating now had more power, more vision, and more strength than all of his investors combined. Miranda's confession. Miranda, faced with the precipitous fall of the empire he had spent his life building, decided to seek out Clara in person. The two met in the mansion's library in a tense conversation. Miranda, for the first time, dropped the pose. He said he knew Clara was behind the leaks, but now he needed her help. He claimed that despite their disagreements, he had always wanted to protect the family, and that deep down he respected his daughter-in-law's coolness and courage. Clara listened to everything without interrupting. Miranda offered a new deal. Clara would officially become a partner in the Hawthorne companies, would use her name to save the family's image, and, in exchange, would have complete freedom to manage whatever she wanted. But Clara refused. He said that he already had everything he needed and that what Miranda feared most, losing control, was already happening. This proposal was not a gesture of humility, but of desperation. Logan's mother was shaken. For the first time, she acknowledged that she had underestimated Clara. She said that if Eugene Rothschild were alive, he would probably treat her like a queen. Clara stood firm. She no longer wanted to fit into cardboard castles. She preferred to build her own empire brick by brick with real values. She said goodbye to Miranda with an icy handshake and a certainty she would never again be treated like a prop. In the days that followed, the press learned about Eugene's inheritance, and Clara's name appeared on the covers of financial magazines. Now everyone knew who she was and where her strength came from. Invitations to speak, interviews, and new business deals began to pour in. And the Hawthornes? They were spiraling into chaos because of their own arrogance. What Miranda and Logan didn't know was that Clara was still holding back her final move, the invitation from the past. While the media was exploring her meteoric rise, Clara received an unexpected invitation. The mayor of her hometown wanted to honor her with a medal for her contribution to the image of the region. Although reluctant, she decided to go. I wanted to see the place where it all began again, but above all I needed perspective. He returned to the farm, where everything was still intact, including the old father sitting on the porch with his eyes lost in time. During the ceremony, Clara met old neighbors, teachers, and even children who remembered her as the girl who sold cakes at the fair. She felt welcomed in a way she had never felt before at the Hawthorne mansion. There people admired her not for what she had but for who she had always been, a woman who never gave up. In her speech, Clara spoke about roots, dignity, and never letting anyone tell us where we belong. That trip brought clarity. The money she inherited was a tool, not an end, and with it she could transform not only her own story, but that of others as well. She decided to invest in rural education and financial independence programs for women in vulnerable situations. The project was named after her mother, Deborah Rothschild Foundation. On her return to Houston, Clara realized that she was no longer a bride forced to sign contracts. She was a woman in control of her own destiny, and the next step was to end the last tie that bound her to that past, her marriage to Logan. But first she wanted to do it publicly, so that everyone would know who really won in the end. The announced revenge. Clara organized a charity event on behalf of the Deborah Rothschild Foundation, inviting business people, authorities, and the local press. Among the guests were Logan and Miranda, who, unaware of the plan, agreed to attend. The evening promised to be elegant, but the atmosphere was tense. Everyone wanted to know how the country girl had become a national figure. At the height of the ceremony, Clara took the stage and gave an emotional speech about power, manipulation, and resilience. She spoke about unfair contracts, about people who use you and then discard you, and about the importance of recognizing your own worth. Without mentioning names, everyone knew who she was talking about. At the end, she publicly announced that she was starting the process of annulling the marriage, as she would never accept living chained by the convenience of others. The revelation fell like a bombshell. Miranda turned pale. Logan tried to react, but it was too late. Clara had elegantly and firmly exposed the true face of the Hawthornes in front of the entire elite. In the following days, society columns, podcasts, and newspapers extolled the courage of the young woman who not only survived, but rewrote her own destiny. With divorce papers in the works and a busy schedule of social engagements, Clara proved that the greatest inheritance she received didn't come in dollars. It came in the form of courage, and that no one could take away from her. The Hawthorne scandal. With the repercussions of the separation, the media began to investigate the Hawthorne family's business in greater depth. The dossier that Clara had sent months earlier returned to the public spotlight, and the federal police began following the case. Logan tried to deny any involvement, but documents signed by him proved his direct participation in fraudulent operations. The family name became synonymous with corporate decline. Miranda, cornered, tried to sell part of the remaining assets to cover losses, but no one wanted to be associated with the tarnished image. Old allies disappeared and the few loyal ones remained out of convenience. Clara, in turn, remained silent, letting the suits speak for themselves. She observed everything as if closing a cycle, with the calm of someone who chose not to seek revenge with hatred, but with integrity. The scandal culminated in a press conference by the prosecutor's office, where it was confirmed that charges had been filed against Logan Hawthorne and other executives. Clara did not have to testify. Her evidence had been forwarded legally and protected. Her name was not mentioned as a whistleblower, but everyone knew the truth. At that moment, she was no longer just the millionaire heiress, but the woman who had single-handedly taken on a corrupt dynasty. The news spread like wildfire. TV shows, websites, and even documentaries began to tell her story. The narrative was clear. A young woman from the countryside humiliated by a hypocritical elite who overcame her with courage, intelligence, and character. Clara became a symbol of female resilience, an inspiration to thousands of women who saw themselves in her. And finally, he felt that he had closed the most bitter chapter of his life. A new chance to love. Months later, Clara was in New York City for a talk on philanthropy and female entrepreneurship. Backstage at the event, she met a guest speaker named Miles Ackerman, the CEO of a social impact startup. Unlike Logan, Miles was direct, kind, and interested in Clara's ideas, not her bank account. Their connection was instant, but Clara kept her feet on the ground. She didn't want any more illusions. The two began exchanging messages frequently and met again at events around the country. Miles valued her intelligence, respected her time, and never forced intimacy. Clara, for the first time, felt free to be who she was without having to please anyone. There was no pressure, no games. It was light, natural, and most importantly, genuine. Little by little, she let him get closer. They were simple dinners, long conversations, and moments away from the cameras. Miles learned about her social project, visited the farm where she grew up, and was enchanted by her worldview. For Clara, this was not a fairy tale. It was real life with someone who saw her as an equal, not a trophy. Although the past still left scars, Clara understood that loving again was not a sign of weakness, but of courage, and she had already proven that she had that in spades. She was ready for a new chapter, one that she would write freely without forced contracts or social masks. The foundation that transformed lives with the Deborah Rothschild Foundation already established, Clara began to expand her impact. She created scholarship programs for girls from the countryside, opened training centers in rural communities, and launched a microcredit platform aimed at women who wanted to start their own businesses. All of this was done with technical, psychological, and educational support. The results were surprising. Thousands of women who previously depended on others were now supporting their families with dignity. Stories began to go viral. Single mothers who opened bakeries, farmers who began selling online, young people who entered universities. Clara made a point of visiting each region that benefited, listening to stories, giving hugs, and reinforcing the message: you can be the protagonist of your life. The impact attracted the attention of international organizations, and soon, Clara was invited to participate in a UN summit on gender equality. There she shared her journey and moved leaders from all over the world. What began as a silent cry against humiliation became a revolution on a global scale. She didn't just change the game. She created a new board. And most importantly, she never lost her roots. She continued to visit her father on the farm, help out at his childhood school, and keep in touch with her first teachers. Clara proved that it is possible to climb without stepping on something, to grow without forgetting where you came from, and to win without needing revenge, because true victory comes from the peace you carry when you lay your head on the pillow. The last encounter with Logan tried to arrange one last conversation, this time without cameras, without ulterior motives. Clara, after thinking about it, accepted. They met in a discreet cafe, away from the attention. He was different, dejected, thinner, and with the posture of someone who no longer had the world at his feet. He apologized, not for appearances, but for not having had the courage to defend her when she needed it most. Clara listened to everything in silence. She said that forgiveness was not for him but for herself, because carrying resentment was a burden that was no longer worth it. She thanked him, but made it clear there was no going back, no room for regrets. Every choice he made had built the abyss that separated them, and now she lived on the other side, where there is respect, purpose, and truth. Logan was silent for a few seconds, staring at the woman he had previously considered weak, and he saw, perhaps for the first time, the greatness of someone who knew how to win without having to destroy. Clara said goodbye with a slight wave and left the cafe with firm steps. That conversation was not a new beginning. It was the end. And she wrote with the ink of overcoming. It was on that day that Clara was certain the best answer for those who doubted her was to live well. And she was doing this masterfully, without failing to inspire those who were still trying to get back on their feet. The woman they never saw coming. A year after it all began, Clara returned to the stage where she had given her first major speech. Now she was honored as one of the 100 most influential women in the world. In her speech, she didn't talk about money or betrayal. She spoke about dignity, reconstruction, and how the world needs to stop underestimating those who don't have famous surnames. She ended her speech by saying, "They called me a country bumpkin. They laughed at my clothes. They forced me to sign papers as if I were an object. But I am living proof that no signature defines a woman. What defines us is what we do with the pain they impose on us. And I chose to transform mine into purpose." The audience stood up and applauded. That night, Clara left the event hand in hand with Miles in silence with a peaceful heart. She had won not with brute force, but with character. Not with shouting, but with actions. Her story was not about luxury, but about freedom. and for that reason it would continue to be told by those who still believe in justice, courage, and new beginnings. And for those who have followed this story so far, here is the invitation. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss any more stories like Clara's, where truth, love, and courage win in the end. Because you also deserve to write your happy ending. Click sign up now. More than stories, here you will find inspiration to turn your life around.